Боссу в Боба не глазом! Выстрел! Выстрел! МЗ, заряжай бронебойный!
Looking at the Soviet T-64 main battle tank, there's a lot of interesting stuff we can talk about. For example, the fact that it was the first Soviet MBT to feature an autoloader and one of the first tanks to have composite armor. It was used in several wars such as the Transnistria War, the first Chechen War, the war in Donbas and the current war in Ukraine. However, today we will not talk about all the tank's achievements and how great it is, but rather the opposite. Today, we're gonna talk about how bad the T-64 tank was. Credits for the video idea go to Spookston, one of my favorite War Thunder YouTubers. He also used to make short history videos about how bad tanks were, but he doesn't do them anymore because of health issues and limited time. Anyways, hello and welcome to the Bobi and Tanks YouTube channel and enjoy this video. Please note that I usually try to stay unbiased in my videos except for the few jokes I like to make. But in this video, I will purposefully talk about how bad the T-64 tank was. So please, do not accuse me of doing pro-Western propaganda. So I will break this video into 4 parts: firepower, movement, protection, and the 3-man turret. So let's get started with the firepower first. Firepower. Talking about firepower, I mean everything that has to do with shooting the tank's gun. One thing that wasn't really an active problem but rather a risk for the crew was the autoloader. As you may know, there are 2 different designs for the autoloader. There's the basket autoloader used by the T-64 and the T-80, and then there is the cassette autoloader used by the T-72 and the T-90. The main difference is in the layout and the way the propellant charges and projectiles get inserted into the gun. The hydraulic basket autoloader places the projectiles horizontally at the bottom of the turret facing towards the center, and the propellant charges vertically along the outer rim of the turret race, front down. The cassette mechanism places the propellant charge on top of the corresponding projectile, also horizontally. And now comes the issue with the T-64's basket autoloader. Unlike the cassette, the basket autoloader is hydraulic, not electronic. This creates the risk of hydraulic fluid setting fire inside the tank if damaged in combat. And because it's right next to the carousel ammo storage, well, I think you know what might happen. Fire plus explosive shells equal to nothing positive. Russians have a history of their ammo storages being responsible for, sending turrets to the orbit. Now, even though the T-64's basket type autoloader allows it to carry more ammo than the cassette type, you could argue whether or not it's worth the risk, which you can openly do in the comments. I personally think the crew survivability in case of a hit to the ammo storage is already as bad as it can get, so it wouldn't make a big difference to make it even worse. Feel free to destroy me for that take. Another problem also about the autoloader was the early version of the basket autoloader. It's a problem that arguably exists with every Soviet and Russian tank using an autoloader, but it was even worse with the early T-64s. What I'm talking about are the safety features for the crews. The autoloader was dangerous for the crews, especially for the gunner who sat nearby. Limbs could be easily caught in the machinery rotating around the crew, leading to injuries and even deaths. A sleeve unknowingly snagged on one of the autoloader's moving parts could also drag a crewman into the apparatus upon firing. That's not something anyone would wish to happen. Talking about the autoloader so much, let's talk about an issue which arises if the autoloader doesn't work anymore for whatever reason. The turret is poorly configured for such a scenario. The gunner has to take on the autoloader's job and load the gun manually, which is not that easy to do. The rate of fire also drops to an abysmal 1 round per minute compared to the usual 5 to 8 rounds per minute. This can be fatal during battle. Also, replenishing the autoloader is a time-consuming task. Movement. Even though the T-64's mobility was overall better than the T-72's, It also had some problems with the completely newly designed and advanced suspension. It suffered from a lot of failures a lot of times. Because of that, teams of civilian mechanics from the T-64 factories were semi-permanent residents of Soviet tank units early in the T-64's initial adoption phase to fix the suspension when it broke down. Again, looking at the engine, the 5 TDF opposed piston engine was very finicky and often malfunctioned and caught fire. Kinda reminds me of the Porsche Tiger. Anyways, Viktor Murachsovsky, who was a battalion commander in the group of Soviet forces in Germany, recalls that in his unit, the rate of engines requiring a major overhaul was close to 1 tank per year. Other sources say this number was as high as 30 in other units. He also noted the difficulty of starting this engine, especially in the damp German winters, and that starting aids used by soldiers like the high-pressure air and oil injection often caused engine fires. Now let's look at the protection of the T-64 tank. Protection. Here comes the autoloader again. The basket-type autoloader stores propellant charges vertically with the rear ends nearly reaching the whole roof. This design, along with the larger diameter of the entire autoloader assembly, makes it more likely that ammunition will ignite if a shell penetrates the crew compartment. Back to the Russian space program. The T-64's small, lightly constructed road wheels are less resistant to anti-tank mines compared to the larger road wheels of the T-72 and earlier Soviet tanks. Additionally, the small diameter road wheels and vertically placed propellant charges in the autoloader expose the charges to hits that penetrate the 85mm hull side armor. These charges are positioned too high to be shielded by the road wheels and too low to be adequately protected by the side skirt armor panels. Also, the T-64's powertrain limitations restrict its capacity for weighty improvements, particularly in armor protection compared to the T-72, which was designed with a more durable powertrain to accommodate heavier upgrades. Now let's talk about the 3-man crew of the T-64 and why it's bad. Firstly, having only 3 crew members, a commander, a gunner, and a driver, complicates the immediate replacement of an injured crewman during combat. In tanks with 4 crew members, an injured crewman can be quickly moved to the loader's space for treatment while the tank retreats. That's another point the T-64 fails in. Retreating. I don't know how well this would work with a reverse speed of 4 km an hour, but anyways. Replacing an injured crewman is harder to achieve in the more cramped 3-man designs, where moving between the turret and hull is difficult and there is no empty space for immediate treatment. Another disadvantage of the 3-man crew is that tanks, as we all probably know, require a lot of frequent maintenance and refueling, which also takes some serious time and energy. Most maintenance work is physically demanding and requires several people. Having only 3 people to do that can present a problem, since most of the time this work is done at the end of the day after a long day of operations, which means the crew most likely is very tired. Now they have 2 options. They either do the work with the risk of being slow or even making mistakes because of being tired, or they just don't do it at all or just half-ass it, which would lead to the tank being poorly maintained, which shows in worse tank performance and mechanical problems, which would again take longer to fix than just maintaining that thing properly. Before I miss it, this problem worsens if the tank's commander is also an officer who must often perform other duties such as higher level meetings, leaving only 2 men to attend the tank. On the T-64, this was even worse because of the complexity of the tank itself. Talking about complexity, the T-64 was more complex than other Russian tanks, which usually were more simple and rugged. It was very care sensitive, which resulted in a very high breakdown rate in the beginning, as I mentioned earlier with the suspension system for example. The engine was also troublesome and sometimes resulted in several units being depleted of several tanks in a single year. Now obviously after all these problems people complain. These complaints even reached Alexander Morozov, who was the chief designer of the Soviet Union. If you watched some of my other videos already, you probably heard his name quite often. He was blamed for the T-64's shortcomings. However, the military school was able to somewhat solve the problem by training the new generation of young officers to be able to deal with all the aspects revolving around the T-64. This generation successfully transitioned from the older mass-produced main battle tanks to the highly engineered third-generation MBTs like the T-80 and T-90 with better trained crews, and the T-64 initiated this shift. Anyways, that was all I had to say for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you think I said anything that is not right, or you think I should have added any additional information to this video, please let me know in the comments and share your knowledge. Besides that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.